He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Hi, I'm Paul Roy. Just a word of warning. This series contains graphic descriptions of rescues and fatalities, as well as some spicy language. Although at times confronting, they are the unfiltered reality of the work of land search and rescue volunteers and those that have been rescued. So if unsettling personal stories affect you, a strong cup of tea might be in order. Episode 9. The Toll. For this last episode, I wanted to take you to some uncharted territory, inside the mind of the seasoned search and rescuer, to hear things from their point of view, their inside thoughts, sometimes quite confronting.
So if I start crying on tape, I'm just going to bawl, all right? And it'll just let rip, but don't be alarmed. It's nothing. That's your outlet. That's how I cope.
The job they do, mostly as volunteers, involves experiencing some of the most horrific things you can imagine. This trauma is real. It's something they have to carry as they return to their everyday lives, until once again they are called on to search and rescue.
And there's mum and dad and the two kids are in the back. Still relatively intact, but checked them all very dead. And it was like, I wasn't expecting that this morning.
These are the sort of experiences land search and rescue volunteers and professionals are expected to deal with, along with the confronting likelihood of coming across a fellow mountaineer and friend.
This guy was fully unconscious and he was really weak pulse. He was obviously dying. He has facial injuries and all the rest of it, and I didn't recognise him. And I never bothered to find out who it was. After a while, he got evacuated out, and I remember, I think it was Trev Street, came up to me and said, that was actually David Hiddleston, and he's dead.
We often remember the names of the people who survived and the people that died, but sometimes the rescuers tend to be forgotten, as is the toll it takes on them.
People kind of have this weird vision of how rescuers are, like totally in control all the time and, calm, wonderful people, but, it can be quite stressful and frustrating.
I talked to two men, one a mountaineer and land search and rescue volunteer, and the other a policeman and SAR coordinator, to get their take on it.
So I'm just saying, as a fair warning, when you asked to talk to me, I was like, hang on, how am I going to feel about this and how am I going to talk about things that maybe I'm going to be dredged up?
This is Alan Urin, mountaineer, a former land search and rescue volunteer who has led a very adventurous life. Once a falling rock broke his pelvis while almost at the summit of a major peak in Awaraki Mount Cook National Park. He self-rescued and spent 4 nights with his climbing partner in a crevasse. You get the picture.
I was born in Gore, 10th the 8th, 1963. Sorry, I rattle that off because I've had quite a few accidents where you have to keep saying your your birth date. My dad was a truck driver for the council there. Mum was a housewife. And when I was about 5, we moved to Ojai, which is a coal mining town near Nightcaps, underneath the Takitimu Mountains. And that was amazing. It was a great place to grow up. We used to go down to the open cast mines that were flooded and go crawlying, catching freshwater crayfish. And none of us could swim, but that didn't really seem to matter to our parents. That classic Kiwi upbringing, we used to make underground huts. We'd dig a hole and then we'd put tin over the top of it and we'd make forts basically. And then we'd proceed to have clod fights. So with the clods that we'd dug out of these holes, we'd throw these things at each other. I remember getting collected on the side of the face with this piece of clay. It hurt. We used to have stone fights in the middle of the street. Well, none of the parents seemed to stop us doing it. I first got inkling for mountaineering underneath the Takatimus, just stunning, up high above the Southland Plains. And I remember standing at this entrance to this valley and just going, oh my God, I get it. At 10, I was like, this is amazing. And I was just totally captivated by mountains. So when we moved to Wanaka, it was like, oh my God, I've arrived.
Alan's parents encouraged him into a painting apprenticeship age 15. Job security, but his heart was never in it.
When I was 18 or 19 and I'd just about finished my apprenticeship, these young guys arrived from Wellington and they came here in 1982, 1983, and they were the first ski bums to ski at Treble Cone, and I met them and they were amazing. They set me on that path to seeing another way of living, not just being a painter and having kids, and they just influenced me to see another way of living. One day I just decided, enough of this, I'm going to be a mountaineer. So I went and got this book out of the library, The Freedom of the Hills, started studying it up. We taught ourselves to do glacier travel and rope up on the flat outside Aspiring Hut. And we were so basic with our skills. We remember talking to each other. Okay, in the book it says, roll your ankles over so all your points are on the ice. If you have just the side points on, you'll skate off and fall off. But we were young and fit and relatively intelligent that we could work it out. And then after that, I started to climb harder and I wanted to push the technical limits of climbing, and I started climbing lots of new routes and pushing my limit of what I thought I could do. I did a lot of soloing. Soloing that should have killed me. No ropes, no harness, no way of backing off something.
As an experienced mountaineer, Al was ideally placed to work as a land search and rescue volunteer, but it was not straightforward.
My first real nasty accident where I kind of was part of trying to rescue was in the 1980s. We were ski touring up the Murchison. We went out on a breaking nor'west storm and the avalanche hazard grew as the day went on. And as we were coming home, this friend of ours peeled off and said, aren't you coming this way? By the time I'd gone to say anything to Trev, he was gone. And those are the last words I ever heard from him.
This was only the first of a number of friends that Al lost to the mountains. Alan then told me about a call-out that vividly illustrated the trauma when rescuing or retrieving the bodies of friends.
A lot of my peers rescue strangers, and I've been unfortunate to have rescued or been in part of rescuing friends, and they leave a real strong impression, much more than just rescuing a stranger, because of the emotional attachment and all the rest of it. Yeah, so they're quite tough. The main thing about all of this stuff and all of search and rescue, all of the trauma never leaves you. And that's the whole thing about people thinking that somehow they can get rid of those feelings and those emotions and all the rest of it. You never get rid of it. All you do is you learn to live with it. And sometimes wells up where sometimes I will just have a cry about Dave or Paul or Trev or all those people who have died, but then it goes away again. Like if one of my friends now was lost in the mountains or, were dead on the bottom of Aspiring and somebody said, look, you've got to go and try and rescue them or whatever, I would. But I'd be really wary of how my mental state would be and my emotional state would be, depending on who that person was. And now that I'm an older man, I'd be really much more prepared for that. But when you're younger and all the rest of it, you just go and do your job. But for seasoned rescuers, you look at it long and hard if it's someone you know.
The accident on Mount Tasman, New Zealand's second highest peak, shocked the climbing world, as 3 very experienced New Zealand guides and a client in a party of 6 died in an avalanche 300 metres from the summit.
I'd just finished a week-long search. That was emotionally quite draining, and I got home to Fox, and I was sitting on my deck drying out my gear, and I got the call, "Oh, there's been an avalanche on Mount Tasman, can you come and help?" No more details than it had been an avalanche and there'd been some people caught. So I get in the machine, and it was quite highly charged because there was lots of machines flying around. It seemed like lots of bodies were being brought out. I was tasked with looking after this badly injured climber, but this guy was fully unconscious, and he was really weak pulse. He was obviously dying. He has facial injuries and all the rest of it, and I didn't recognise him. And I never bothered to find out who it was. And it's weird because I'd ski patrolled, and you always find out the name of the injured person, and because you talk to them, ask their name. After a while, he got evacuated out, and I remember, I think it was Trev Street, came up to me and said, "Oh, that was actually David Hiddleston, and he's dead." And it was really upsetting. Then a bit later, someone said, "Oh, and also Paul Scaife, he's dead as well." And so it was this double whammy where I loved Paul a lot. I didn't have much to do with him, but he was a lovely man. He was a local Wanaka mountaineer, one of the first from the Scaife family, and he was just a lovely, gentle man. I remember we went and climbed a new route up the Matuki. Me and my partner ended up at Colin Todd Hut with no gear. Didn't have a sleeping bag, or it was quite cold in the morning. And I just remember this lovely act of kindness from Paul where he put his sleeping bag or blanket over me, because he left really early to go and climb aspiring. I was just going to sleep in. And he put a blanket over me and, tucked me in, basically. It's just a classic Paul Scaife gentlemanly thing to do. Anyway, so I lost it. Emotionally, I lost it. This wave of grief and sadness and stress and everything just blew me off the glacier, basically. I actually had to go away. I had to remove myself from the group of people because I was wailing so loudly, and you could see it was upsetting people. Went behind some rocks or whatever and just bawled my eyes out. It was just full on. I remember we had a critical incident debrief with a psychologist. One of the Mount Cook rescuers, he said to the psychologist, "What was it with Alan? What was that problem? What was he doing?" It's really weird for them to see somebody being so emotionally upset during a job. And I kind of got the feeling that she thought I was weak and that I wouldn't be capable of dealing with a highly charged situation or a stress situation or whatever. And crying to that degree and losing my rag, basically, was a weakness, and I shouldn't be doing it. But as I've worked out now, that's my major coping mechanism. It's a valve that blows on the pressure cooker, and when it blows big time. It's just like, it scares me a little bit. Being able to let rip like that at that time pretty much shields me from ongoing major mental illness down the track. Being able to express my emotions openly and freely when they well up like that without pushing them down is the best thing for me, and I think I'm a really mentally healthy person after all these things that have happened because of that.
The SAR police coordinators who run any operation are equally vulnerable to the stresses of the job.
I was at Whangarei Boys High, left school, went to Wellington, got a job, and just faffing around trying to work out what I wanted to do.
This is Aaron Nicholson, the Wanaka Police Land Search and Rescue Coordinator for 18 years, a veteran of numerous search and rescue operations.
Sent a letter to the New Zealand Police and to the Army, and I was ambivalent about which one. The police came back to me straight away.
And how old were you then?
I was 19.
Oh, okay.
So I wasn't even old enough to go into the pubs when I joined the police.
Aaron spent 10 years, mostly in Auckland, the majority in the Armed Defenders Squad. When a job opening came up in Wanaka in 2003, he and his young family relocated.
We'd just had our firstborn. So we came down here, and I loved the outdoors. I loved skiing, the hunting, the multi-sport stuff. And Wanaka was just a fantastic option to take. So yeah, I jumped on that.
Until his retirement from the police in 2018, Aaron had been a driving force with the Wanaka Land Search and Rescue. He is very much a can-do kind of guy.
When I first arrived, there was only 5 of us then. Part of that job was not just about being in charge of the station. Pete Corbett, who was a classic guy, he said, "Oh, you're in charge of search and rescue as well." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, people get lost in the backcountry and injured, and we go out and rescue them." And I said, "Oh, well, okay, that can't be too hard." So one day he said, "Well, let's go out and I'll show you your backyard." And we were going to go and climb a spiring. And I went, "Sure, let's go and do that."
I told you Aaron was can-do, didn't I?
So I was ignorant. I didn't have any idea, and I probably shouldn't have been there in the first place. But him and myself and a couple other cops from Queenstown teamed up and climbed a spiring. It wasn't that hard. Can't see what all the fuss is about. Until, in 22 years later, I can't think of how many deaths, and how many dramas and people we picked up broken and bashed in and around that mountain, So it was like, if I'd fallen over, someone would have said, "Yeah, of course, stupid idiot. He's got no idea what he's doing. He's from Auckland, so he's one of those Aucklanders." Some of the gear had no idea. So that was my sort of baptism into saying this is search. This is the environment we're in, which was a big difference to the Northland beaches and the city of Auckland. Since then, I've climbed it about 5 or 6 times, skied off the top of it, played around in that space and really enjoyed it. Yeah, I had to learn the business of search and rescue, what it's about, how it works in a small town. And it was really, really, really busy because we were doing something like 50 jobs a year back in those days. And there were a few more searches than rescues, which there are now because of personal locator beacons, PLBs. When I left, I'd have probably done over 600 SAR operations and been to probably 40 coronial investigations in relation to deaths.
Having attended so many rescues and recoveries over the years, and dealing with grieving relatives afterwards, I asked Aaron the effect on him.
It's cumulative, I suppose. You deal with that emotional side. You grow up through the police, you have to be very staunch, right? Because that's the era where you grow up and everything's just, you take it on the chin. You can't be emotional. You can't, there's a lot of dark humour, which is really useful, although very, very inappropriate by today's standards. There's no malice or intent in that space, but then you use that to manage things yourself. You just get conditioned. That's the way you should respond, even though if you're a very outgoing, flamboyant, expressive person, you have to subdue that over time. But then that comes out at some stage. And I suppose you get a little bit more fragile over time with some of that. My trigger was Cessna crashed back of Treble Cone there in the Motatapu, North Branch. And one of the helicopter pilots flew past, and it was like, there's a plane on the side of the hill. And he didn't know whether it'd been there for 5 minutes or 5 days. And it was most unusual because we hadn't heard anything about it. So he rings me, and I'm sitting in the office, and he goes, "Aaron, there's a Cessna crash on the side of the North Branch of the Motatapu." And I'm going, "Well, heard nothing. Check RCC, they've heard nothing, da-da-da." He goes, "Oh, no, I think you should come and have a look because I don't know if people are in it or not." And so it was like casually, "Oh, okay, I'll come for a look." So he came pick me up and flew out there and just dropped me off near the machine so we didn't blow it over a bluff. There was mum and dad and the 2 kids were in the back, still relatively intact, but checked them all very dead. And it was like, I wasn't expecting that this morning. So I sit there and say, well, okay, I need ACR team and I need this and we need some ropes and we need doctor to actually come in here and help confirm that these people are deceased and stuff like that. So I sat there with the family for an hour, and that was quite emotional. And I was quite angry, and I went, I couldn't believe that people would do that with the kids, fly around the machine like that and they crash and And then it was like, I wouldn't be thinking about that if it was a road crash. You know, if someone was in a car, it would be like, oh, that's normal. That happens all the time. So I was a bit miffed about that, but it took me a while to go, well, it's a judgment call. The reality is accidents happen, and they were doing what they do. Both people were flight instructors, so it wasn't like there was a lack of judgment or competence. But because I had kids the same age, it was one that sort of impacted you, and then you add that to all the other ones that you've tried to avoid. So yeah, it builds up over time.
And you said it impacted you, Aaron. How did that demonstrate itself?
Well, coming back, trying to explain it, it was hard to stay emotionally unattached and to be matter of fact. You know, we're always trained in the police to black and white, deal with the facts, no emotion, and having to relay that story winds me up a bit. And we were having a meeting here and I had to step outside and just calm myself down to be able to explain it. Even now, it triggers something for some reason.
Before I left Alan-Urin, I posed a question which I have thought about a bit, having lost friends in the hills myself. Going back to, when you've had to attend, or particularly friends dying in the mountains, is it helpful at all that the people at least died doing what they like doing?
Oh, that's such a crock of shit. Sorry, Paul, but I don't mean to get my dander up, but that's such a cliche. There's no way that they were loving any fucking part of that major falling or trauma or whatever they were going through at the time. There's nothing pleasant about dying in the mountains generally. The whole dying, doing what you love thing is romanticising death. It doesn't matter how you die, you can't really gloss over it. Dead is dead, and I'm overreacting a little bit, but people do need a life raft to cling to when someone dies suddenly. Yeah. Sudden death is really difficult to deal with because one minute you're talking to that person and the next minute they're dead. And so any little thing that someone can cling to as a life raft and gives them comfort and hope, fantastic, grab hold of it. But it doesn't for me. It is just humans trying to somehow make sense of something that is pretty nasty. Then the other one is the body recovery thing, and somehow thinking that we bring closure. Closure for what? What are you trying to close? If it's practicable and it's not going to upset rescuers too much and it's all good, it's pretty controlled, and there's no real objective danger, then yeah, sure, get the body. But don't put all this massive pressure on body recovery. And I've gotten in trouble with police, because police need to cling to this fact that somehow they've won over death. They've got one over death, and they've given this family some sort of closure. They've brought their loved ones back to them. It's so weighted.
It can be quite valid in some cases, but I agree that a lot can be made of it.
Whatever gets you through, mate.
Yeah, exactly.
And I used to be all sort of...
Al obviously has strong views on the retrieval of bodies and the idea of closure. But he and Sergeant Aaron Nicholson did a job together, which shows there is no right or wrong. Everyone deals with it the best way they can. Aaron tells the story about a young American student and two Kiwis on a very popular tramp in Mount Aspiring National Park.
Yeah, Alison Willan was a really interesting job. It was over the Gillespie Pass.
Gillespie Pass is a very popular tramp, heavily promoted in social media. It is a moderate alpine crossing.
So there were three people from Dunedin University. She was an American student visiting, or she was doing a stint at Dunedin. They decided to go tramping, so they got together and organised themselves. Came down here and parked in Makaroa, and then walked across the Makaroa and up the Wilkin and Siberia, stayed in the hut. So they spent the night in the Siberia, and then the next day they went up and over Gillespie Pass and wanting to head to the young.
And in good weather, a solid but not dangerous route between the Young and Siberia valleys. With a well-marked track, good huts at either end, and is walked by hundreds each year.
The weather had deteriorated significantly, so I'm not sure how well they'd read the weather. Alison, or Ellie as she was known, was she had a bit of an injury, I think, a bit of a knee injury, so she was a bit slower than the other two. And as they got up through, out of the bush line and up onto the moraine up there and the rocky sections, exposed sections, the weather got worse and worse and worse. And instead of staying together, they had sort of separated a bit. By the time they got near the top of the pass, I think, the girl at the front had sort of stopped by a rock, and the next one had come in and stopped, and they waited for Ali, and she got there afterwards, and they were quite stressed about the environment, and they felt, wound up enough to go, we need to get out of here, we're all going to die. Essentially made that number one mistake of separating instead of going at the slowest person's pace. And this is not a criticism or a judgment, it's just an observation, right? So you can't explain this without saying, they should have stayed together, and even if they had the worst night out, they would have had a few laughs being miserable together, right? Hiding under a rock, if that's all it took. Misery loves company, you're all alive in the morning and you've got a story to tell. It's raining quite heavily, really cold. So they separate based on their pace, and one zooms off quite quickly and gets up and over and down the other side of the pass and off towards the young hut. The next one's slower, and Ellie's even slower again. So they're all separated, and this is high on the tops and a really exposed place and a steep descent as well in wet conditions. So again, you'd think that, you'd stay together and you'd help each other, and if one of you, the party were a bit injured, they'd need support going down there. So it just seemed that sense of self-preservation for young people, and it's obvious and it's clear and it's not a judgment, it's just I need to get out of here because I'm going to die. I'm not sure whether their gear was suitable for that environment, so they're probably freezing their butts off and wanting to get out of there as fast as they can. So they made the mistake of separating, and that ultimately led to Ellie continuing on and not staying put. They all descended. The water came up and the young that it had flooded. By the time the first herd went through, it had flooded the track. So when Ellie came down, it was getting towards dark. The signs for the track was probably still above water, the little waratahs with the orange caps on them, but the track was flooded. So she couldn't see where the track was, so she had to try and negotiate around the track. And coming back, and I think, and this is just surmising, this is a hypothesis, that she had got down there, didn't know, because they didn't have a clear map, didn't have experience, they didn't know the area, this is the first time they were there. And those sort of weather conditions, cold, injured, really unhappy, trying to find their way to civilization, that people will err towards those signs, the little waratahs. So it's like the track's there somewhere. So she's gone around the water and then crossed back into the water to try and find the track. And early on in the piece at the top of the young there, she has fallen into the water and she'd been pinned and drowned. She never fronted up at the hut. There were a bunch of young guys at the hut, and the two girls were there, and they said, they're waiting for Ellie, and they were the boys talking about going back and searching for her, but the weather was so miserable that none of them decided, it was too risky to do that. So it gives an indication of what the conditions were like. They waited over the night and then thought, no, she hasn't come, so there's drama. I think a couple of them hightailed down the young to raise the alarm. Said, we're missing this person, this is quite a serious one for us. So we got the river rescue team, flew in straight away the next morning, started the search, essentially from the bush line coming up in case she'd gone back, from the top going down in case she'd fallen, and the river corridor itself were the obvious search areas for us. So we put teams in all those places, established comms network up there, flew the area, searched it aerially, and searched all the way down, and then started putting kayakers in at the bottom of the Young River and a boat in at the top of Lake Wanaka in case someone had been flushed down. So we were covering a lot of ground and with a lot of people. That took a day or so. It was that first day we found some clothing turned inside out, and that is a clear indication that someone's been pinned and the clothing's been, she's been flushed and the water's taken and turned their clothing inside out. So we found that early on in the top part of the Young River. So that was a bad sign for us. It was like, okay, this is what's happened. And so we need to search the riverbank in case she survived that. So the river team concentrated more on the river, using probes, underwater GoPros, searching the river corridor from that point all the way down. We were convinced I think it was the end of day one, that she was in the water and drowned, and she's obviously pinned somewhere in there. But the river rescue boys couldn't search her properly because the water was too high. Meanwhile, the parents flown over from America and had stayed up at the motel close to the police station, and then there was liaison with them about what had happened. And again, going full circle on this, talking through the search, explaining to them what happened, explaining to them that there's, where she's been and that there is little chance that she survived this. And this is what the clothing means, that she has been caught in the river, and not just caught, but pinned in the river, to be stripped and the clothing inverted. And they were always looking for hope, and you go, there is a chance, but not a very good chance. And we're expecting to find her in the river, and we've decided we can't search that safely. We've searched as much as we can given the amount of water, so we have to wait for the water to drop down to the same level it was before the flood to give our guys the best chance of finding her. So there was a really nice family, and the dad and the uncle was here, and they were poring over what we did and what we didn't do and the rationale, and it was nice to be able to explain our rationale, our methodology, and to give them confidence and comfort in what we were doing. As I said to them, we'll find her. If she's there, we'll get her. And that was writing out some fairly big checks, right? But I was confident that river rescue guys are really good at what they do, giving them some reassurance that this is what we do for a living. We more or less, we're good at it. Just, we'll find her if she's here. And I think they were quite well heeled and had the means to facilitate a bigger search, to the point where they said, if you need helicopters, we can get as many as you want. They didn't understand the environment, but they said, we'll just drain Lake Wanaka. We'll drain the lake.
Lake Wanaka is New Zealand's fourth biggest lake, and 45 kilometres long, 12 kilometres wide, and 300 metres deep in places. So this was obviously not possible.
In a nice way, they just wanted to do everything they could. So they were very, very anxious to do more and do more and do more, and said, look, we've got money, you need more helicopters. I said, we don't need any more helicopters. It's not a money thing, it's an understanding of the environment and what's happened to her and where she is and how she can be recovered. We had the Otago Council river levels. We knew what they were when they started, what they were now, and we said, when this graph drops down to that point, we can send the river team back in and they'll be able to search that river corridor properly. And it took, I think, about three or so days before that the weather came right for us to do that, the river levels dropped.
Usually, the family of a missing person would not go on any search, but in this case, Aaron made an exception.
We took the brother and the father into that environment. Normally you wouldn't involve them in a SAR operation itself, but I could see there was value in them understanding that environment because it was so foreign to them from where they come from. So Alan Urin and myself took the brother and our dad into, and we got dropped off halfway up the Gillespie Pass. We worked our way up, walking through up the top of Gillespie Pass, over the pass itself. We had lunch up there. And by the time we'd worked through there and they'd seen the environment, the really cool thing was that they'd rationalised the death. She wasn't alive. And they thought, what a wonderful place for her to be. To spend the last part of her time, which was, I found it was quite rewarding. That they'd gone through the process. They'd said, hoping she'd be found alive. And we said, it's very unlikely. And then they'd just over that 3 or so hours, they'd gone, what a gorgeous place. I see why they came here. They weren't angry, they were just, really happy.
Take a breath, you need.
Sorry, it's a bit emotional talking about some of that stuff. I suppose happy is the wrong word, actually. They weren't happy, but you know what I mean? They'd sort of found peace in that space. I just thought it was cool that they were just content with her decision to go and to be in that environment. What a lovely place to be. And they had really good memories of it, which was an unexpected outcome, really. So, there was value in that, I thought, and it was good to do that with them. It was just, I don't know, it seemed to be so cathartic for them. We were just coming down off the pass into the Young, and I got a radio call from the river team that they'd found Alison. So it was like brilliant, that was fantastic. So good news. So they came to pick me up, because part of that process, I suppose, because, being in the police, if there is a dead body, it's like that's a police job. So I got to tell the family. They were so relieved, because it was like, are we never going to take her out? Will we never find her? We know she's here. And this is a wonderful, wonderful place. But there's a difference between actually finding her. So, you could see they were so relieved that we'd found her. Yeah, from a SAR perspective, it was a good job. From a family perspective, helping the family understand where she was and what happened to her was awesome. And their closure, that was great.
The New Zealand wilderness is a zone between heaven and earth. The line between the lucky and not so lucky is a thin one, drawn and redrawn by the rescuers who live and work there. Before I go, I would like to thank all those men and women, rescuers and the rescued, who generously shared their experiences. It was not always easy, bringing back memories of friends lost, hazardous trips, and difficult rescues. Well summed up by former Wanaka Land Search and Rescue Chairman Bill Day, who describes the volunteers as quintessential good bastards who get out of warm beds on a stormy night to go and look for strangers. Thanks to the producers of this series, Phil Vine, Justine Murray and Justin Gregory. Thanks to Ben Pearce, the engineer for this episode. Production coordinator, Brianna Juratich-Gregg. Executive audio editor, Tim Watkin. Find and follow Search and Rescue NZ on your favourite podcast app or at rnz.co.nz/podcasts. Kia ora, and thanks for listening.